Blood on a tailored Tom Ford suit was just a Tuesday for the brutal head of the Chicago syndicate. But the sight of a dark, plum-colored bruise blooming against the soft, pale skin of his wife's arm brought the underworld to a dead, terrifying halt. He was a ruthless monster to the city, but to her, he was an impenetrable shield. The air in the penthouse turned to ice as his voice shattered the heavy silence. "Who dared touch you?" The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Gold Coast penthouse, blurring the glittering, jagged skyline of Chicago into a smear of neon and charcoal. Louis Valerius stepped out of the private elevator, the heavy steel doors sliding shut behind him with a definitive click. He smelled of rain, expensive tobacco, and the metallic tang of fear that always lingered on his clothes after a visit to the subterranean warehouses on the South Side. At 34, Louis was the undisputed king of the city's criminal underbelly. He was a man carved from marble and malice, with eyes the color of a bruised winter sky. He unbuttoned his soaked suit jacket, tossing it over a velvet armchair, and let out a long, ragged exhale. The city demanded his cruelty, but this penthouse was his sanctuary. Here, he wasn't the boss. He was just a man desperate for the warmth of his wife. He found Clara in the master suite, seated at her ornate mahogany vanity. The soft amber glow of the crystal chandelier caught the golden threads in her thick, honey-brown hair as she brushed it with slow, rhythmic strokes. Clara was not the typical Mafia wife. She wasn't one of the waif-like, surgically enhanced socialites that draped themselves over the arms of his capos, desperate to fit into sample-size designer gowns. Clara was a woman of undeniable, breathtaking substance. She was fat, possessing a lush, unapologetic figure that Louis worshipped with a religious fervor. She had thick, soft thighs, a full, curving belly, and heavy, beautiful breasts that spilled over the lace of her emerald-green silk robe. Where the rest of the world saw a body that defied the shallow conventions of elite society, Louis saw a Renaissance painting brought to life. He loved the weight of her in his arms. He loved the softness that grounded his sharp, violent edges. "You're home late," Clara said softly, her voice a warm melody that instantly quieted the roaring beasts in Louis's mind. She didn't turn around, catching his reflection in the heavy, silver-backed mirror. "There were complications at the docks," Louis murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble as he crossed the plush Persian rug. "Nothing I couldn't handle." He stepped behind her, placing his large, heavily scarred hands gently on her shoulders. He leaned down, pressing a lingering kiss to the soft curve of her neck, breathing in the scent of her vanilla and sandalwood perfume. For a moment, the world was perfect. Then Clara shifted, reaching across the vanity to grab a jar of cold cream. As the wide sleeve of her silk robe slipped down, exposing her pale, dimpled upper arm, Louis's eyes locked onto it. The romantic fog in the room instantly evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, terrifying vacuum of air. There, stark and violent against her flawless, creamy skin, was a bruise. It was the distinct, unmistakable shape of a handprint, a brutal cluster of dark purple and angry red marks where fingers had dug viciously into her flesh. Louis froze. The silence in the room became deafening, heavy with the sudden, catastrophic drop in atmospheric pressure. The man who had gently kissed her neck a second ago vanished, replaced by the apex predator who had clawed his way to the top of the Chicago syndicate. "Clara," Louis whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a deadly warning. Clara immediately realized her mistake. She quickly tugged the silk sleeve back down, her heart giving a nervous flutter. "It's nothing, Louis. I just bumped into the edge of the car door. When I was getting out," Louis's hand shot out, his fingers incredibly gentle, but possessing an immovable, terrifying strength as he caught her wrist. He slowly, deliberately, pushed the silk sleeve back up, exposing the brutalized flesh. His chest heaved. The bruise was large, the violent purple already turning a sickly yellow at the edges. Someone had grabbed her. Someone had put their filthy, aggressive hands on the woman he considered a living saint. Someone had hurt her. "Who dared touch you?" The furious Mafia boss roared, the sound tearing through the bedroom like thunder. Clara flinched, not from him, but from the raw, unhinged violence in his voice. "Louis, please, it's not a big deal. Don't make a scene out of this." "Not a big deal?" Louis spun her heavy velvet stool around, so she was facing him. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the ruin of his tailored trousers, bringing himself eye level with the mark on her arm. He didn't touch the bruise. He hovered his trembling fingers over it, treating it like a desecrated monument. "This is a handprint, Clara. 4 fingers and a thumb. You think I don't know what violence looks like? You think I can't read the language of pain? Someone grabbed you with the intent to harm. Tell me who it was." "It was just a misunderstanding," Clara pleaded, her wide hazel eyes searching his furious face. She reached out, her soft, plump hands cupping his rigid jaw. "I handled it. You don't need to rain hellfire on the city. I will burn Chicago to the bedrock if someone so much as looks at you wrong. And you know it," Louis snarled, turning his head to press a fierce kiss into her palm before fixing his chilling gaze back on her. "Give me a name, Mia Regina. Now!" Clara swallowed hard. She knew that look. It was the look that preceded a sudden, violent disappearance. "Louis, if you don't tell me," Louis said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper, "I will have Dominic pull the security footage of every single place you stepped foot in today. I will interrogate your driver. I will question your security detail, and when I find out they let someone get close enough to lay hands on you, I will put a bullet in both of their kneecaps before I even go after the person who did this." Clara gasped, knowing he was entirely serious. He wouldn't hesitate to ruin the lives of her bodyguards. "No, don't touch them. They were outside. It happened in the women's lounge. They couldn't have followed me in." "Where?" Louis demanded, his eyes flashing with lethal intent. Clara let out a defeated sigh, her broad shoulders slumping. "At the Women's Auxiliary Charity Luncheon at the Peninsula Hotel." Louis's mind raced, cataloguing the event. It was a snake pit of high society wives, old money matriarchs, and the spouses of his rivals. Who was it? Clara looked away, deeply ashamed, though she had done nothing wrong. It was Camilla. Camilla Russo. The name hit the air like a live grenade. The Russo family. The only syndicate in the Midwest with enough firepower and sheer audacity to occasionally test Louis's borders. And Camilla Russo was the boss's sister, a venomous, hollow-cheeked socialite known for her vicious temper and insatiable cruelty. "Camilla Russo put her hands on you," Louis repeated, the words tasting like ash and iron in his mouth. He stood up slowly, towering over his wife, a dark silhouette against the glittering backdrop of the stormy city. "Tell me exactly what happened, Clara. Every single word." The memory of the afternoon made Clara's chest tighten with a familiar, suffocating anxiety. Being the wife of a billionaire mafia boss meant she had a seat at the most exclusive tables in the world, but it didn't mean she was accepted. The elite circles of Chicago, The old money remnants of the Astor and Vanderbilt bloodlines, mixed with the newly minted tech billionaires, were ruthless. Clara had arrived at the Peninsula Hotel wearing a custom-made, ruby-red Dior gown that hugged her heavy curves beautifully. She knew she looked stunning, but the moment she stepped into the grand ballroom, she could feel the judgment radiating from the sea of size 0 women. She took a deep breath, relaying the events to Louis, who paced the bedroom floor like a caged panther. "The luncheon was fine at first," Clara said softly, wrapping the silk robe tighter around her full stomach. "I was seated with the mayor's wife and a few board members, but I could hear the whispers, Louis. It's always the same. They don't bother to hide it anymore." Louis stopped pacing, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were bone white. "What did they say?" Clara looked down at her lap. "Just the usual venom. How they couldn't believe a man with your power and your looks chose a woman who takes up so much space. I heard someone ask if you were keeping me around as a tax write-off for a bakery." A feral growl ripped from Louis's throat. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling Clara to her feet and crushing her soft, warm body against his hard chest. "They are starving, miserable skeletons who would kill to have a fraction of the life and love you have," he whispered fiercely into her hair. "You are a goddess. You are abundance. I don't want bones, Clara. I want you." "I know," Clara murmured, soaking in his reassurance. "And I usually ignore it. I really do. But after the main course, I went to the powder room in the West Wing. I wanted a moment of quiet." She closed her eyes, the scene playing out vividly. The marble-clad bathroom, smelling of expensive floral soaps and Tom Ford perfume. She had been washing her hands, admiring the reflection of the diamond necklace Louis had bought her for their anniversary, when the heavy oak door swung open. Camilla Russo had walked in, flanked by 2 of her equally sharp-featured sycophants. Camilla was striking in a terrifying way, all sharp angles, bleached blonde hair, and eyes as cold as dead coins. "Well, if it isn't the Great Wall of Chicago," Camilla had sneered, locking the bathroom door behind her. Clara hadn't engaged. She dried her hands on a monogrammed towel, keeping her chin high. "Excuse me, Camilla. I need to get back to my table." "In a rush for dessert, Clara," Camilla had mocked, stepping into her path. "Careful. Keep eating like that, and Louis is going to roll you right out of the penthouse. My brother says Valerius is making a play for the South Side docks. Tell me, is Louis expanding his territory just to afford your grocery bills?" Clara told Louis how she had kept her composure. "I told her that my husband's business was none of her concern and that she should step aside." "And did she?" Louis asked, his voice deathly quiet. "No." Clara swallowed hard. She stepped closer. "She started talking about you, Louis. She said that everyone knows you only married me to appear domestic to the feds. She said that behind closed doors you must be disgusted, that a real man wouldn't want to bury himself in a mountain of fat." Louis's eyes rolled back in pure, unadulterated rage. He released Clara, spinning around and launching a devastating punch into the solid oak door of his custom closet. The wood splintered and cracked with a violent crack, but he didn't even flinch. Blood beaded on his knuckles. "Louis!" Clara gasped, rushing forward to grab his hand. "Finish the story," he commanded, his chest heaving, his eyes fixed on the splintered wood. Clara stroked his knuckles, her voice trembling. "I lost my temper. I stepped up to her, and I told her that my husband worships the ground I walk on, which is more than anyone can say for her. considering her fiancé left her at the altar for a cocktail waitress. I told her she was hollow, inside and out. A dark, terrifying smirk ghosted over Louis's lips. Good girl. That's when she snapped, Clara continued, touching the bruise on her arm. She lunged at me. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and she pulled me toward her. She looked frantic, almost crazy. She hissed in my ear that the Valerius Empire was going to burn, and that when you were dead, she was going to have my fat corpse paraded through the streets. She grabbed you, Louis repeated, the smirk vanishing, replaced by a cold, calculating void. She dug her claws into you. I shoved her off of me, Clara said proudly. She stumbled back and hit the marble counter. I walked out and found my security detail. We came straight home. I didn't want to tell you because I know how fragile the truce with the Russo family is. You've been trying to legitimize the business, Louis. I didn't want my pride to start a mob war. Louis turned to her, his expression utterly devoid of humanity. It was the face of the Reaper. There is no business without you, Clara. There is no empire without my queen sitting comfortably on the throne. If they touch the queen, the truce is dead. He turned and strode toward the bedside table, picking up his encrypted phone. Louis, what are you doing? Clara asked, a knot of genuine dread forming in her stomach. I am going to make a phone call, Louis said smoothly, dialing a number. And then I am going to erase the Russo bloodline from the face of this earth. Before Clara could protest, the line connected. Dominic, Louis said, his voice echoing in the large room. Gather the men. Wake up Leo and the cleaners. I want every business owned by the Russos burning before sunrise. And find Camilla Russo. I want her alive, and I want her brought to the warehouse. He hung up the phone. Clara stared at him, terrified of the bloodshed she had just inadvertently unleashed. Louis, she's a woman. A stupid, petty woman. A mob war over a bruise? It's never just a bruise, Louis said, walking back to her and gently tracing his thumb just millimeters above the purple skin. It's a message. It's a test of my boundaries, and the Russos are about to fail it spectacularly. But as Louis looked closer at the bruise beneath the bright chandelier light, his sharp eyes caught something that made his blood run completely cold. He pulled Clara's arm closer to the light, right in the center of the deepest purple mark where Camilla's thumb had dug the hardest into Clara's flesh. There was a tiny, microscopic square of redness. It didn't look like a broken blood vessel. It looked like a puncture wound. Clara, Louis said, his voice suddenly stripped of rage, replaced by a razor-sharp, clinical urgency. Stay exactly where you are. Louis, what is it? You're scaring me, Clara whispered, watching as her husband sprinted into the adjoining study and returned a moment later with a heavy tactical flashlight and a small magnifying loupe he usually used to inspect uncut diamonds. Hold your arm still, Louis ordered, his tone brokering no argument. Clara held her breath as Louis clicked on the harsh, blinding LED light, directing the beam right onto the bruised flesh. He leaned in, placing the loupe over his eye. The silence in the room stretched, pulling tight like a piano wire. Clara watched the muscles in Louis's jaw flutter. When he finally pulled away, his face was as pale as death. She didn't grab you just to hurt you, Louis said, his voice a horrifying, hollow monotone. She didn't grab you out of anger. What are you talking about? There's a dermal patch embedded in your skin, Louis said, stepping back, pulling his phone out again with lightning speed. Microsilicone, invisible to the naked eye unless you know exactly what the entry point looks like. She slipped a transdermal tracking and audio device under your epidermis when she squeezed your arm. Clara swayed on her feet, the blood rushing from her head. A tracker. In my arm. Dominic! Louis roared into the phone the second his underboss picked up. Halt the assault teams. Bring the tech sweeps to the penthouse immediately. Get the lead surgeon from our underground clinic here in 5 minutes with a scalpel and local anesthetic. We are compromised. He threw the phone onto the bed and rushed to Clara, catching her as her heavy body buckled with shock. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms, carrying her to the center of the room, away from the windows. Louis, they've been listening? Clara choked out, tears of violation springing to her eyes. The idea that someone had invaded her body, placed a bug inside her own skin just to get to her husband, was nauseating. She felt filthy. Only for the last 2 hours, Louis said, setting her gently on the edge of the bed. They heard me come home. They heard you tell me about the luncheon. They heard me call for the hit. Clara covered her mouth. Oh my God! I led them right to us. I gave them our plans. You gave them nothing, Louis said fiercely, grabbing her face. They used you because they are cowards. They knew I was tightening security around the business, so they targeted the one place I would never suspect. The one place I let my guard down. Within 10 minutes, the penthouse elevator dinged, and the doors opened to chaos. 5 men dressed in black tactical gear poured into the apartment, armed with heavy assault rifles and sweeping the rooms with electronic bug detectors. Dominic, Louis's fiercely loyal underboss, a towering brute with a scarred eye, marched into the bedroom, followed by Dr. Aris, the syndicate's private physician. Boss, Dominic said, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Clara, instantly softening with respect. The perimeter is locked down. We jammed all outgoing signals the second you called. Did you block the feed from the patch? Louis demanded, standing protectively in front of Clara. Yes, Dominic nodded grimly. But we have a bigger problem. The signal wasn't just transmitting audio. It was a bio-tracker. The Russos didn't just want to listen to your plans, Louis. They wanted to know your exact coordinates inside the building. They wanted to know which room you sleep in. Louis's blood turned to ice. A targeted strike. An airstrike or a sniper team from an adjacent roof, Dominic confirmed. If they have the coordinates of this bedroom, you're sitting ducks. Get it out of her, Louis commanded the doctor, pointing to Clara's bruised arm. Now. Dr. Aris quickly approached with a sterile silver tray. He swabbed Clara's arm with iodine, the cold liquid making her shiver. This will sting, Mrs. Valerius, he murmured gently. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, turning her face into Louis's stomach. Louis stroked her hair, his large hand trembling with a rage so profound it transcended anger. He watched as the doctor made a tiny, precise incision over the darkest part of the bruise. With a pair of silver tweezers, the doctor dug into the flesh, pulling out a microscopic, glittering silver chip no bigger than a grain of sand. Got it, Dr. Aris said, dropping the chip into a lead-lined vial. Dominic, Louis said, his voice dropping an octave, echoing with a demonic resonance. Take that tracker. Go to the Southside warehouse, the one we abandoned last year. Tape it to a rat and let the Russos think we are hiding there. When they send their hit squad to that warehouse. Dominic grinned, a terrifying, predatory stretching of his scarred face. We fill the warehouse with C4 and blow them to Kingdom Come. Exactly, Louis said. But that's just the soldiers. I want the head of the snake. I want Antonio Russo. And I want his sister. As Dr. Aris bandaged Clara's arm, she looked up at her husband. The soft, loving man who had kissed her neck just an hour ago, was entirely gone. The dawn of Chicago had taken the wheel, and the air crackled with his lethal energy. "Louis," Clara said softly, her voice drawing his attention back. "Camilla said something else in the bathroom. Something I didn't understand until right now." Louis knelt down in front of her. "Tell me, Mia cara." She said, "Your husband's empire is going to burn, and it's going to be lit from the inside." Clara frowned, her brow furrowing. She didn't just mean the tracker. She meant they have someone inside our family. A traitor. Dominic shifted uncomfortably behind them, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Boss, that's impossible. Only the inner circle knew about your plans for the docks, and the Russos clearly knew about it before Camilla confronted Clara." Louis slowly stood up. The implication was staggering. If a capo, or worse, someone in his immediate circle, had flipped, the Valerius family was bleeding out from a wound they couldn't even see. "No one leaves this penthouse," Louis ordered, looking between Dominic, the doctor, and the heavily armed guards at the door. "No one makes a phone call. We are at war, and the enemy is already inside the gates." He looked back down at Clara, at the white bandage stark against her beautiful, soft skin. The Russos thought they were clever. They thought they could use a woman's insecurities, a high society squabble, to plant a weapon on his wife. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had touched Clara. "Rest, my love," Louis whispered, leaning down to press a kiss to her forehead. "By the time the sun rises, there won't be a Russo left alive to speak your name." The storm outside intensified, lightning flashing across the Chicago skyline, illuminating the dark, vengeful path the Valerius family was about to walk. The twist of betrayal hung heavy in the air, but one thing was absolute. Whoever dared touch Clara was going to die screaming. The penthouse, usually a sanctuary of soft jazz and the scent of Clara's vanilla perfume, had been transformed into a suffocating war room. The heavy blast doors over the private elevator were sealed shut. The rain continued to batter the reinforced glass of the Chicago high-rise, reflecting the fractured neon lights of the magnificent mile below. Louis poured 2 fingers of 20-year-old Pappy Van Winkle into a crystal tumbler, his movements mechanical, devoid of his usual fluid grace. He didn't drink it. He just stared at the amber liquid, his mind running through the lethal calculus of betrayal. Clara sat on the edge of the cream-colored sofa, her heavy, gorgeous curves wrapped tightly in her emerald robe. Despite the throb in her arm and the lingering shock of the surgical extraction, her mind was razor-sharp. She had grown up on the fringes of this life, aware that loyalty was a currency often traded for blood. "Who knew about the docks, Louis?" Clara asked, her voice steady. She refused to cower. The men in this city might look down on her because she didn't fit into their sample-size, emaciated ideals of beauty, but she possessed a formidable intelligence that Louis relied on. Louis looked up, his icy eyes meeting hers. "Only 3 men. Vincent, who handles the zoning payoffs, Frankie, who manages the union bosses, and Leo." "Leo," Clara repeated, the name leaving a bitter taste on her tongue. Leo was Louis's head of security. He was the man who had supposedly vetted her bodyguards. He was the man who had access to the penthouse's encrypted firewall. "If the Russos knew I was making a play for the South Side docks, one of them sold the information," Louis said, setting the glass down with a sharp clack. "And if they managed to sneak a micro-tracker into a high-society luncheon without my men noticing, it means whoever betrayed us had the authority to pull your security detail off the bathroom doors." Clara's blood ran cold. "The bodyguards at the peninsula. They didn't follow me to the restroom corridor. They stayed by the ballroom doors. I thought it was just hotel protocol. There is no protocol that supersedes my orders, Louis snarled. He pressed a button on his desk console. Dominic, bring Vincent, Frankie, and Leo up here. Right now. Within 20 minutes, the three capos were standing in the center of the expansive living room. They looked uneasy, their expensive suits damp from the storm outside. Dominic stood behind them, his massive arms crossed, his hand resting inches from the custom 1911 pistol holstered at his waist. Louis didn't say a word at first. He walked slowly around the three men, his presence suffocating. He was a predator circling a trapped herd. Clara remained seated, her chin held high, watching their micro-expressions. "There is a leak," Louis finally said, his voice a lethal whisper that commanded absolute silence. The Russos knew about the dock expansion, and this afternoon, Camilla Russo assaulted my wife. Vincent, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses, gasped, his face paling. Frankie shifted his weight, his rough, calloused hands clenching into fists. But Leo, tall, slick-haired, dressed in a sharp Brioni suit, tightened his jaw. It was a microscopic movement, but Clara caught it. They planted a localized bio-tracker in Clara's arm, Louis continued, stepping directly in front of Leo, a tracker that requires short-wave calibration. Whoever planted it needed someone inside my network to lower the firewall for exactly 3 seconds to let the signal ping the Russo servers. Louis pulled a printed data log from his jacket pocket and slammed it onto the glass coffee table. My private servers logged a 3-second firewall breach at 2:14 p.m., Louis said, his voice rising to a terrifying crescendo. "Exactly when my wife was in that bathroom. Only 4 people have the master override code to my servers. Me, Dominic, Clara, and the head of my security." Leo's eyes darted toward the private elevator, a fatal, desperate tell. Before Leo could even reach for his weapon, Dominic moved with terrifying speed. He kicked the back of Leo's knees, sending the man crashing to the Persian rug. Dominic's heavy combat boot came down on the back of Leo's neck, pinning him to the floor while he stripped him of his gun. "Boss, I swear," Leo choked out, his face smashed against the carpet. "It wasn't me. They're setting me up." Louis waved a hand. Dominic yanked Leo up by his hair, throwing him into a heavy leather chair. Louis leaned in, resting his hands on the armrests, trapping the traitor. "You let that hollow-cheeked, venomous bitch touch my wife," Louis whispered, the rage radiating from him in palpable waves. "You let her dig her claws into Clara's skin." "Louis, please," Leo begged, sweat pouring down his face. "Antonio Russo. He has my brother. He took him 2 days ago. He said if I didn't give him the dock intel and help Camilla plant the bug, he would send my brother back to me in pieces." "And so you decided to trade my wife's life for his?" Louis roared, backhanding Leo across the face with such force that a sickening crack echoed through the room. Blood sprayed across the leather. Clara didn't flinch. She watched the man who had smiled in her face and complimented her dinners bleed. "They promised me the South Side, Louis," Leo wept, spitting blood onto his lap. "They said if they took you out tonight at the penthouse, they would back my claim to the throne. I had no choice." Louis stood up, straightening his cuffs. His eyes were devoid of mercy. "You always have a choice, Leo. And you chose the losing side." Louis turned to Dominic. "Where are Antonio and Camilla waiting to watch the fireworks?" Leo sobbed, his bravado entirely broken. "Fulton Market, the old Castiglione meat-packing plant. They have a bunker under the freezers. They're waiting for the sniper team to confirm your death before they pop the champagne." Louis looked at Dominic. "Have our boys at the abandoned warehouse triggered the trap?" Dominic checked his encrypted phone and grinned, a brutal, ugly smile. 2 minutes ago, boss. The Russo hit squad breached the doors. We detonated the C4. There's nothing left of them but teeth and ash. Good, Louis said coldly. He turned his back on Leo. Dominic, take him to the balcony. No, Louis, boss, have mercy! Leo screamed as Dominic dragged him backward by his collar, hauling him toward the sliding glass doors that opened to the stormy 50-story drop. Clara stood up, her silk robe pooling elegantly around her bare feet. She walked over to Louis, wrapping her soft, plump arms around his rigid waist, pressing her cheek against his back. She didn't ask him to stop. In this world, mercy was just an invitation for a second bullet. The sound of the sliding glass door opening was followed by the roaring wind and rain of the Chicago storm. A brief, muffled scream was instantly swallowed by the night, and then the doors clicked shut. Dominic stepped back inside, adjusting his cuffs. Balcony is clear, boss. The air in the penthouse shifted from defense to absolute, offensive war. Louis was no longer the protective husband. He was the boss of the Valeria Syndicate, a general preparing to slaughter his enemies. He moved to the armory concealed behind the mahogany bookshelf in his study. He strapped a custom tactical vest over his dress shirt, loading magazines of armor-piercing rounds into his dual Sig Sauers. Clara stood in the doorway, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She watched him gear up, her beautiful, full face pale but resolute. Louis paused, looking at her. He crossed the room, taking her soft, fleshy face in his rough, calloused hands. He brushed his thumbs over her cheekbones, his eyes burning with an intense, proprietary devotion. They thought they could use you as a pawn, Louis murmured, his voice thick with emotion. They looked at you and saw a vulnerability. They are stupid, arrogant fools. You are not my weakness, Clara. You are the reason I am invincible. Tears pricked Clara's eyes, but she blinked them back. Come back to me, Louis. Don't let them take you away from me. I am the king of this city, and you are my queen, Louis promised, pressing a fierce, bruising kiss to her lips. It tasted of whiskey and violence. I am going to bring you Antonio Russo's ring, and I am going to bring you Camilla's tongue. No one touches you and lives to see the sun rise. Just come back alive, she whispered, her hands gripping his tactical vest. Louis pulled away, his face hardening into a mask of pure lethality. Dominic, leave 5 of the best men here with her. Nobody gets off this floor. If anyone who isn't me steps off that elevator, shoot them to pieces. Understood, boss, Dominic grunted, racking the slide of his assault rifle. 20 minutes later, a fleet of black, armored SUVs tore through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago, heading straight for the industrial gloom of Fulton Market. The cobblestone streets were slick and deserted, the shadows of the old meat-packing plants looming like jagged teeth against the night sky. They parked 2 blocks away, advancing on foot through the torrential downpour. Louis moved like a shadow, his men flanking him with military precision. The Castiglione meat-packing plant looked abandoned, but Louis's thermal scopes picked up the heat signatures of 6 heavily armed Russo guards stationed at the loading docks. Louis raised his hand, signaling his snipers positioned on the adjacent roofs. Thwip, thwip, thwip. Silenced rounds shattered the heavy rain. The 6 guards dropped simultaneously, their blood washing away into the industrial drains before they even knew they were under attack. Louis kicked in the heavy steel door of the loading dock. The smell of copper, old blood, and freezing ammonia hit them instantly. They navigated the labyrinth of hanging meat hooks and frosted plastic curtains. As they approached the heavy iron door leading to the underground bunker, muffled bass music and the faint sound of laughter leaked through the cracks. Antonio and Camilla thought they had won. They were celebrating the death of the Valerius Empire. Louis strapped a block of breaching explosive to the locking mechanism. He stepped back behind a concrete pillar. "For Clara," Louis whispered. He hit the detonator. The explosion ripped the iron door off its hinges in a blinding flash of orange, fire, and deafening noise. Before the smoke could even clear, Louis and Dominic breached the room, their weapons raised, raining hellfire upon the occupants. The bunker was lavish, a stark contrast to the slaughterhouse above. Velvet couches, a crystal chandelier, and a table covered in cocaine and expensive champagne. 3 Russo soldiers barely had time to draw their weapons before Louis's rounds tore through their chests, dropping them to the plush carpet. Antonio Russo, a stocky man with slicked-back hair, scrambled backward over a leather sofa, screaming as a bullet shattered his kneecap. He collapsed, clutching his ruined leg, his gun clattering across the floor. And there, standing frozen by the wet bar, an unlit cigarette dangling from her trembling lips, was Camilla Russo. The silence that followed the gunfire was deafening, broken only by Antonio's pathetic whimpers and the harsh, ragged breathing of Louis Valerius. Louis stepped through the smoke, his gun leveled directly at Camilla's head. His eyes were dead. "Did you really think," Louis said, his voice echoing in the blood-spattered room, "that you could lay your filthy skeletal hands on my wife, and I wouldn't burn your entire world to the ground?" Camilla's arrogant facade shattered. She dropped her lighter, her hands flying up in a desperate gesture of surrender. "Louis, wait! It was just a warning. It was just business." "Business?" Louis laughed, a dry, terrifying sound that made Dominic shiver. "You put a tracker in the flesh of the woman I worship. You insulted my queen. You dared to touch the Madonna of Chicago." Louis didn't hesitate. He didn't monologue. He aimed slightly down and pulled the trigger. The bullet shattered Camilla's right shoulder. She shrieked, collapsing into the glass bar, bottles of expensive liquor shattering around her. "That," Louis said coldly, walking toward her, "is for the Bruise." He turned his weapon toward a sobbing Antonio, who was bleeding out on the velvet rug. The Russo Empire was crumbling in real time, right before their eyes. The storm had finally arrived, and Louis Valerius was the lightning. The bunker beneath the Fulton Market meatpacking plant smelled of expensive ozone, sulfur, and the coppery tang of spilled blood. The crystal chandelier flickered, casting fractured, distorted light over the velvet furniture, and the shattered bottles of Macallan 64 that bled amber liquid into the plush carpet. Antonio Russo dragged himself backward, leaving a thick, glistening trail of crimson from his shattered kneecap. His breathing was wet and frantic. His heavy gold Audemars Piguet watch scraped against the floorboards as he clawed at the ground, trying to put distance between himself and the Grim Reaper, wearing a bespoke Tom Ford suit. Louis, wait! We can make a deal!" Antonio choked, his slicked-back hair falling into his terrified eyes. "You want the south side? It's yours. I'll give you the transit routes. I'll give you the offshore accounts in the Caymans. 50 million, untraceable." Louis Valerius didn't break his stride. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding marble. He holstered one of his Sig Sauers, stepping over the corpses of the Russo guards. "Do you think I need your money, Antonio?" Louis's voice was a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "Do you think the Valerius Empire needs your scraps? This was never about territory. This was about respect, and you spat on it." To his right, Camilla Russo was weeping hysterically, clutching her shattered shoulder among the broken glass of the wet bar. The aristocratic, hollow-cheeked socialite who had sneered at Clara just hours before was now a trembling, pathetic mess, her designer gown soaked in her own blood. "It was just a prank," Camilla shrieked, tears carving tracks through her ruined makeup. "It was just a tracker, Louis. We weren't going to hurt her. We just needed to know where you were." Louis stopped. He turned slowly, his icy eyes locking onto Camilla. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "A prank," Louis repeated, the word tasting like venom on his tongue. He walked toward her, his heavy boots crunching over broken glass. He grabbed a fistful of her bleached blonde hair and yanked her head back, forcing her to look into his dead, merciless eyes. "You put your filthy hands on my wife. You left a bruise on her skin. You looked at my queen, a woman of absolute beauty and substance, and you called her a mountain of fat." "I was angry. I was just trying to insult her," Camilla sobbed, her aristocratic facade entirely gone. "You insulted the only thing in this world that keeps me from burning Chicago to the ground," Louis snarled. "You looked at her body, a body I worship, a body I bury myself in to forget the monsters like you, and you thought she was weak. You thought because she is soft, she is defenseless. But her softness is my religion, and you desecrated my temple." Louis released her hair, letting her slump back into the broken glass. "I promised Clara I would bring her your tongue," Louis said clinically, pulling a matte black Benchmade combat knife from his tactical vest. Camilla's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. She scrambled backward, but Dominic stepped forward, his massive hand clamping down on her uninjured shoulder, pinning her to the floor. "But I realized something on the ride over," Louis continued, his voice devoid of any human empathy. "Clara is too pure for trophies of gore, so instead, I will simply take your voice." Louis raised his Sig Sauer, aiming directly at the center of her chest. "Tell the devil who sent you," Louis whispered. He pulled the trigger twice. The silenced thwip-thwip echoed dull in the bunker. Camilla's eyes went vacant, and she slumped forward, dead before she even registered the finality of her mistake. Antonio screamed, a guttural sound of pure agony, as he watched his sister die. "You're a dead man, Valerius. The New York Commission will hear about this. You can't wipe out a recognized family over an insult to a fat bitch." Louis moved with blinding speed. He crossed the room and drove the heavy steel toe of his boot directly into Antonio's broken kneecap. Antonio's insult turned into a sickening, high-pitched wail that tore at his vocal cords. Louis knelt beside the weeping mob boss. He grabbed Antonio's left hand, slamming it flat against the floorboards. "The Commission only respects power," Louis said coldly, pressing the razor-sharp edge of his Benchmade knife against Antonio's pinky finger, right above the heavy gold Russo family signet ring. "And by tomorrow morning, they will know that the Russo family was eradicated in a single night because they lacked the intelligence to leave my wife alone." With a swift, brutal downward motion, Louis severed the finger. Antonio convulsed, his eyes rolling back in his head as shock and blood loss overtook him. Louis calmly picked up the severed digit, slipping the heavy gold signet ring off the bloody flesh and dropping it into his pocket. He tossed the finger aside. "Chicago belongs to the Valerius family," Louis said, standing up and towering over the dying man. "And Clara is its unquestioned queen." He aimed his pistol at Antonio's forehead and ended the Russo bloodline forever. The bunker fell into a suffocating dead silence, broken only by the steady drum of rain leaking through the cracked concrete ceiling. Dominic stepped up beside him, his boots avoiding the pooling blood. "The warehouse trap took out their lieutenants, boss," Dominic reported, looking at a message on his encrypted phone. "The Russos are extinct. The police will chalk it up to a syndicate power struggle, and the commission will stay out of it. Nobody will shed a tear for Antonio." Louis stared at the bodies, feeling the violent, roaring beast inside his chest slowly begin to settle. The blood debt was paid. "Burn this place to the foundations," Louis ordered, turning his back on the carnage. "I'm going home to my wife." Dawn was breaking over Lake Michigan when the private elevator of the Gold Coast penthouse finally dinged. The storm had broken, leaving the sky a bruised mixture of violet, indigo, and pale gold. The city of Chicago was waking up, entirely unaware that the tectonic plates of its criminal underworld had just shifted violently in the night. Louis stepped out of the elevator. He was exhausted. The adrenaline had faded, leaving his muscles heavy and aching. His bespoke suit was ruined, stained with rain, plaster dust, and the undeniable crimson splash of Antonio Russo's blood. He unholstered his weapons, setting them on the marble foyer table with a heavy thud. The penthouse was quiet, bathed in the soft, ethereal light of the morning. The tactical guards Dominic had left behind gave Louis a silent nod before retreating to the outer corridors, giving the boss his privacy. Louis walked slowly toward the master suite, his heart pounding a different, more desperate rhythm now. He needed her. He needed to wash the scent of death from his skin and bury himself in the absolute, unconditional warmth of her love. He found Clara exactly where he had left her, though she had moved to the plush velvet armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunrise. She was still wearing the emerald-green silk robe, her thick, honey-brown hair falling in soft waves over her heavy breasts. At the sound of his footsteps, she turned. Her beautiful, full face was pale, shadowed by a sleepless night of terror and waiting. But when her hazel eyes landed on him, standing there alive, whole, and breathing, a radiant, staggering relief washed over her features. "Louis," she breathed, standing up. She didn't care about the blood on his shirt. She didn't care about the smell of cordite. She rushed across the Persian rug, her soft, bare feet silent, and threw her arms around his neck. Louis caught her, wrapping his large, calloused hands around her thick waist and pulling her lush, heavy body flush against his. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the sweet, grounding scent of vanilla and sandalwood. A ragged seam tore from his chest, the final remnants of his murderous rage evaporating into the dawn air. "I'm here, Mia Regina," he whispered fiercely into her skin. "I'm right here." Clara pulled back just enough to frame his face with her soft, plump hands. Her thumbs traced the dark circles under his icy blue eyes. "Are you hurt? Tell me you're not hurt." "Not a scratch," Louis promised, leaning into her touch. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy gold signet ring. He placed it gently on the mahogany side table. Clara looked at it, the crest of the Russo family gleaming dull in the morning light. She knew exactly what it meant. The threat was gone. The people who had tried to violate their sanctuary, who had tried to use her body as a weapon against him, had been erased from existence. "It's over," Louis said, his eyes never leaving hers. "They will never touch you again. No one will." Clara looked down at her arm. The small white bandage covering the extraction site of the tracker felt like a distant memory. Beneath it, the purple bruise was already fading into a dull ache. But the emotional weight of what Louis had done, burning an entire empire to the ground to protect her honor, settled deep into her bones. "You started a war for me," Clara whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I ended a war for you, Louis corrected, lifting her gently into his arms. Clara gasped softly, wrapping her arms around his broad shoulders as he carried her toward the massive, silk-sheeted bed. I would burn the entire world if it meant keeping you safe. I would tear down heaven and hell to make sure you never have to feel a moment of fear. He laid her down on the soft white sheets, the emerald silk of her robe parting to reveal the gorgeous, unapologetic curves of her thighs and the soft swell of her stomach. Louis looked at her with a reverence that bordered on the holy. The women of high society, with their sharp angles and hollow cheeks, were ghosts compared to the vibrant, living goddess lying before him. He stripped off his ruined tactical vest and his blood-stained shirt, leaving them in a heap on the floor. He crawled onto the bed, hovering over her, his heavily scarred, muscular chest rising and falling with deep breaths. He reached out, his long fingers trailing with agonizing gentleness over the soft, dimpled skin of her uninjured arm, over the dip of her waist, and the full, heavy curve of her hip. "You are my heart, Clara," Louis murmured, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss to her lips. "You are my empire, and long after the rest of this city turns to dust, I will still be right here, worshipping at your feet." Clara pulled him down, capturing his lips in a deep, passionate kiss. The Chicago skyline burned with the light of a new day outside the glass. But inside the penthouse, the king had returned to his throne, completely and utterly at the mercy of his beautiful, untouchable queen. And just like that, the Russo Empire was reduced to ash, all because they made the fatal mistake of underestimating a king's devotion to his queen. Louis proved that true power isn't just about controlling the underworld. It's about fiercely protecting the woman who grounds your soul, regardless of society's shallow standards. Clara wasn't just a Mafia wife. She was the untouchable heart of Chicago. If you loved this intense, twist-filled Mafia romance, smash that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow romance junkies and subscribe for more thrilling, dark romance stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. See you in the next one.